Hello everyone, I'm Zulfikar Singadikerta, and I'm going to present an assignment, to be honest, about the recommendation, the policy recommendation to recover, to make the economy recover. You know. Of course, the policy recommendation is attributed to combat the recession that is caused by the pandemic of COVID-19. All right, but before that, of course, we are going to learn a bit again about GDP. And my friends out there, some econ students, fellow econ students out there who have learned about macroeconomics are very much, what is that? Familiar with this term like GDP equal the aggregate consumption, the total investment, government spending, and export minus import, or trade balance, or net export, we call it. And so in this case, if the aggregate consumption is decreasing, or any of these variables are decreasing, the GDP, of course, is going to be decreasing as well. And then what we call about when the consumption is decreasing very, very sharply, it's called a demand shock, because of course, the aggregate demand, this consumption is not there. The aggregate demand is falling, is having a free fall. And we are going to talk about supply shock, of course, later on. But before that, I'd like to quote one of the most brilliant economists out there, and he's also a Nobel Prize winner. His name is Mr. Paul Krugman. He said, "This is not a conventional recession. Of course, we've had this kind of recession in 2008, the global financial crisis that is caused by the housing market bubbles, and of course, we shall not forget the Asian financial crisis in '97, having a domino effect starting from the Thailand, of course, to South Korea and also to Indonesia, and but those recession were caused by so-called the human error, of course, and there was a bank error in the banking system, in the debt. It had something to do with debt, with housing markets and stuff. But this time it is caused by ourselves. Well, actually, it was caused by this pandemic of COVID-19, but the one that is killing the economy is the lockdown that we impose on ourselves because we want to survive. So this is not a conventional recession, it's more like a medically induced coma. So yes, of course, in where you temporarily shut down much of the brain's activity to give it chance to heal. So we are designing the economy to die first or sleep first in order for the people to be productive again, to be healthy, and then when they become productive again, the economy is going to running as it were before the pandemic. So we are talking about the demand shock, and in macroeconomics, a Keynesian macroeconomics, that is called the negative multiplier effect. For example, there is a kedai, or in Indonesia we call it a shop, or maybe a cafe, with a gross income of 13 million rupiah, and it has expenses such as paying for their workers here, or perhaps paying for their rent of their shop, and it costs about 20 millions. So the net income, it will be 10 millions. But in order to get 10 millions in net income or gross income for 30 millions, they ought to have this 300 people visiting their shop per day. But because of the lockdown, because people are afraid of leaving their houses, because they are afraid of being infected, of course, uh, there won't be any, the same amount of visitors. The 300 people, and maybe 150 of them stay at home, leaving only 150 people visiting the cafe. And what does it mean by this? Of course, the gross income is going to be decreasing, the net income is going to be decreasing as well, but because some expenses stay the same. For example, the the price of the rent of this shop. So in order to get still very steady net income or not minus 10 net income, they have to cut some of their expenses, one of which is cutting the amount of workers working there. So the decrease in demand, leaving, leading to revenue decrease. And because certain expenses does not decrease, companies have to lay off workers. So these workers, which are who are losing their jobs, they lose their purchasing power as well. So they might cut or stop their spending, in which they will create another demand shock. Because, for example, if this worker, regularly visit a super mall or a shopping mall, those shopping mall are going to have, a decrease in visitors as well, in buyers as well, and then those shopping malls have to cut their expenses as well, because their revenues or their gross income maybe are decreasing as well, and the expenses are not decreasing. So more workers losing their jobs, creating another demand shock and another demand shock. That's called negative multiplier effect. That's basically what's been happening to our economy because of the lockdown we impose. So because of that, of course, we see a decrease in global GDP growth. We see, some countries, especially the red ones here, advanced economies are hit the hardest. Were hit, sorry, the hardest, especially European countries, because some of these countries, they don't like having a very high economic growth, because economic growth leads to high inflation. They like to control their inflation. So when a crisis hit, of course the economic growth are going to to be plunging, are going to have a free fall, especially in advanced economies like United States and Europe. But unfortunately, in some struggling economies, some emerging markets, they are also having a very hard times. But for Indonesia, we see Indonesia it is said by IMF in their World Economic Outlook, Indonesia only has this kind of minus 1.5%. An annual percentage changes, of course, but in the third quarter we had this minus 3.4, but annualized, it will be like minus 1.5%. But still, it's minus. But yeah, but apparently, oh, sorry, this is a typo, by the way. This is not 3.3, it's minus 3.3 in emerging economies. And then um, so if we compare Indonesia to another triple B countries, of course we have this kind of credit rating system, and one of which is Fitch. Maybe you can see the S&P one, the Moody's one, but I'm using the Fitch credit ratings here. And then according to Fitch, there are several countries who are categorized triple Bs, one of which is Philippines, Russian Federation, and India. And of course, we have our neighbors, Philippines and Vietnam, our Asian countries neighbor, uh, ASEAN, sorry. And then if we compare Indonesia to these countries, we see that Indonesia is actually performing better than some of their triple B friends. For example, India, who have this kind of minus 10.3%, and Philippines having a hard time as well with minus 8.3%. Russian Federation, performing poorer than us. But if we compare to our neighbor Vietnam, who had this kind of economic growth, a massive economic growth, taking advantage of the trade war between America, United States of America, and China, and then they are not having a minus economic growth. In fact, it's just still plus 1.6%. So Vietnam outperform our country and the rest of the world, apparently in some of but of course, some countries are performing good as well. It's like Egypt right over here, Myanmar, and then People's Republic of China, the source of the pandemic. They're performing quite better as well. And so if we see here from the BPS-Statistics of Indonesia, we see that we are actually entering recession in the third quarter, with having a minus 0.5, staggering minus 0.5 in the second quarter, and then minus 3.4 in the third quarter. So year on year, of course, year on year means if we compare the third quarter to the third quarter in 2019, we are actually, plunging, like plummeting about minus 0.3%. And then, so of course, to understand that, we are reminded again to the first macroeconomics formula that I introduced in the very beginning of this presentation, the Keynesian macroeconomics, a very standard macroeconomics, which means if anything that decreases amongst these variables, of course the GDP, the Y, are going to be decreasing as well. Okay, let's see. So there is a multiplying effect, a demand shock, and then it's caused by the decrease in mobility. If we see the big data, I'm using the big data from the Google Analytics, Google Mobility Index, a decrease in mobility is actually happening because we see in Indonesia, according to Google, there is like a decrease in until minus 18% from the baseline in the December 6th, in the Sunday. Of course, the Google Mobility Index only measure on Sunday, because Sunday is when people usually are going out to meet their friends, to hang out, and etc. etc. And in the parks and recreation and stuff, there was actually an increase in October. However, it's plunging and it's plummeting again in December 6th until minus 20%. And in transit stations, which means people are really not going out. It hit until minus 30%. It's the worst performing than any other variables over here. And then in the workplaces, people are asked to stop working, and then of course when people does not work, they are they don't do the consumption activity around the work area. And then we see an increase in residential area by 7%, because people are staying at home. But if we see here, the 7% here are not really, because if we think that everyone stays at home, the residential number, it should be higher than 7. So we see that in the next in the next graph over here, it's index penjualan real. IPR actually depicts the the small enterprises, especially the ones who are working in formal sectors. We see that maybe the 7% here, if the informal sector workers are staying at home, maybe it's going to be increasing much more than 7%. But I think it's also because the one that can afford to stay at home is actually the middle to middle upper class, because they have savings, they have steady incomes. They got, for example, maybe they are a civil service, maybe they are white collar workers that have a salary above 5 to 6 millions per month. But those who are working in the informal sectors, especially the one selling street foods and etc etc, in this case, they don't really have the privilege to stay at home, because if they stay at home and they don't have any revenue generating from their sales, they are going to having a very hard time. They're not going to be able to feed themselves, feed their families, so they have to go out. So which means there's the policy that we have to design the policy that helps these informal sector workers, especially the middle to lower class. And we see in here, based on the IPR, in the November 2020, it's going down about minus 5.3% if we compare it monthly, month to month. In the November, it's decreasing minus 0.4% from October. So these decrease in IPI, it happens in every commodities, type of commodities, in which textile, clothing, and then cultural commodities and recreational commodities and stuff, and having a very hard time. They're having a very difficult time. And then it's according to OCE of Mandiri. Getting the information from them. So if we compare our data with South Korea, I think this thing also happening in our country and also in the rest of the world. We see that the retail and recreation in the October and before October, because we know that the South Korean government are performing very nicely in tackling the pandemic. And then it increases the confidence of the people, so they can go out. They're feeling very, very safe because South Korean government are performing very good in tackling those pandemics. And then, but we see that there is a rise in around October here, in the early December right over here. This is October, I think, around here. And then we see the increase in cases in South Korea, according to our world in data. It's, equals in the decrease of people going out to retail and recreational place, to workplaces, and an increase in residential area, which means the higher the case, the more people stay at home. And then we see this because some of the middle to upper class behavior of consuming behavior, it's actually affected by our mobility. And then so the more the pandemic is getting, the getting it, when the pandemic's getting worse, essentially people stop consuming and they stop spending, unless there's a digital infrastructure and it's going well. Maybe those people can actually still consume whilst at home, and we're of course we're doing that very quite good right now. We have e-commerce, satisfying our demand when we cannot go out. And then in Indonesia, according to Statista and John Hopkins CSSE COVID-19 map, of course, right over here, Indonesia is still rising. The case of COVID-19 in Indonesia still rising, and we haven't seen any decrease actually, and then it grows steadily. And of course, the greater the number of the cases, the greater the number of the death rate, it frightens people. They don't want to consume, they don't want to go out, and they are afraid of actually dying out there. And then of course we see that happening as well in Sweden. Of course, in Sweden, the government decided to follow one of their controversial decision made by the epidemiologist Anders Tegnell. Anders Tegnell said that we don't really have to, impose the lockdown and let the people just go out. They're having a good time, so that our economy is not going to be hurting, Anders Tegnell said. And then the Swedish government, of course, it's based on scientific findings. They follow the epidemiologist, what is that, suggestion. And then it Anders Tegnell kind of hoping that the Swedish people are going to have this kind of what is that? I almost forgot, but I think it's immunity, herd immunity. They were trying to reach herd immunity, but the number said, of course, in COVID-19 data, you can check yourself in John Hopkins CSSE COVID-19 map, the numbers of Swedish COVID-19 case were really, really high, and still is the higher amongst the Scandinavian countries. Per capita death rate in Swedish is staggering. And then uh, if we see the Economist 2020 compare the consumer behavior, of those two countries, Denmark and Sweden. Sweden does not impose lockdown, did not impose lockdown, sorry, and then Denmark imposed lockdown very, very strictly. And then the finding is very, very, what is that? Very, very interesting, because we found out that the consumer behavior are not very different among from Denmark and Sweden. Sweden having less consumer, spending, and also Denmark have less consumer spending. But in Denmark's case, it was designed to be that way because the government imposed lockdowns. But what happened with Sweden? It turns out that people were afraid of dying. They thought, oh, if I go out, it will be me, the one next dying on the hospital bed, having with short breath and anosmia and fever. I mean, because they were afraid, they stayed at home, and not only that they ruined the economy, but they also letting the numbers of COVID-19 cases and death rates rising. And then so it means we see that this uh, what is that, this conclusion about the higher the cases, the more people stay at home, and the more people stay at home, the worse the aggregate consumption is actually to be true. Now the point is that, so the help should be directed to the middle lower class, to the lowest of decile income over here. And to boost middle to upper class spending habits, the government needs to take care of the pandemics as soon as possible. Of course, some of the option that we can do is monetary policy by lowering interest rates and etc. etc. Or perhaps for fiscal policy, using this kind of supply side economics and demand side economics. So we see the option one, monetary policy. We can actually manipulate the interest rates, lower them, and then the uh, Bank Indonesia right now, the BI rate is actually 3.75%. 3.75% is actually the lowest in our history. But what we see, according to LDR, loan to deposit ratio, from June 2019 to June 2020, we see since over here, since January, we see that the pandemic actually, has an effect since February 2020, right over here, a decrease. It keeps on decreasing since February, and we are seeing the loan to deposit ratio in June 2020 is 89.1%, and I believe that it's going to be decreasing, keeps on decreasing as well until now, till December, and then and this is the lowest, to be honest, since 2016, I believe, according to Otoritas Jasa Keuangan. So it means that we haven't seen any borrowing activities done by many investors. So monetary policy by lowering interest rates may not work because what can the companies do? Maybe yes, they can borrow the money from the banks to expand their business, but why should I expand the business? A company would say, if the demand is not there, because the aggregate demand is shifting to the left in the macroeconomics curve. And then, so how about supply side economics? So another Nobel Prize winner, Joseph Stiglitz, another Keynesian economics, we see that according to him, a tax cuts, one of supply side economics involve tax cuts, deregulation, etc., etc. So the companies have more incentive to expand their business because the money that they should pay for the tax to the IRS, for example, in the United States, is used to expand their business and hire more workers, building more factories out there, basically spread their wings. But tax cuts apparently do not lead to faster growth, according to Joseph Stiglitz, only to lower revenues. Because, of course, in one of our income, the country's income is through taxes. And actually, the most prominent income the country can have is from taxes. So it does not lead to faster growth. It leads to lower revenues. Why is that? So, for example, a company has this kind of $1 million in income, and then the tax rate is 25%, which means they have to pay about 250 grand, 250K. So we just decrease the interest rates to 20%. So which means they only have to pay about 200K in tax. So there's this kind of difference of about 50 grand difference. So the 50K, the 50 extra money received by the companies due to the lower tax rates can be used, for example, yes, to expand their business and just like what I said, hire more workers, and then it has more contribution towards the people. But let's not forget that those people and those companies actually have shareholders. So the 50 grand that's supposed to be used to the development and go to the research and development division, or perhaps to build more companies, to build more factories and hire more workers, are going to be used for fulfilling the pocket of the shareholders. So in that case, Joseph Stiglitz also said, who create jobs? Does the company actually create jobs? So he would say that the one that create jobs is demand, is us, people who have demand. So when there is demand, firms will create jobs to satisfy that demand, especially if we can get the financial system to work in the way it should, providing credits to small and medium enterprises. So because Joseph Stiglitz say some people, especially American people, maybe Indonesian people too, are entrepreneurial. When there is demand, those entrepreneurs are going to respond to demand, satisfy the demand, supplying the demand. So when the demand is not there, there won't be any supply and there won't be any expansion. So this is it. The one true answer, I think, for the current situation is demand-side economics. We are, we go back to the theory of John Maynard Keynes in Keynesian economics about expansionary fiscal policy. So we have to boost demand, shifting the curve, the aggregate demand curve to the right. So the supply are going to answer that and eventually create a economic growth post-pandemic. So what kind of fiscal policy? So because we know that those informal sector workers, they cannot stay at home unless they have money, you know, because we don't really have a social protection as good as other countries. Indonesia doesn't have that, to be honest. So the thing that the government can do is to provide cash transfer for the poor or to the lower income groups. So they, instead of going out and searching for searching for money, they are provided by the government, the money for their daily supplies. So by providing cash transfer, the poor doesn't really have to leave home because they are supplied by the government in terms of fulfilling their basic needs, buying foods, groceries, and stuff. All right. And then the second is the credits to the micro and small medium enterprises, or MSMEs, through the banking. In Indonesia, we have BPR, we also have banking. So how can the government do? Of course, the banks or the BPR and etc. are going to have this kind of interest rates, bunga in Indonesia. So the interest rates that needs to be paid by the MSMEs are going to be paid by the government. Whilst paying for example, the interest rate is 2%. So the 1.9% of the interest rates are going to be paid by the government, leaving only 0.1% of interest rate that needs to be paid by these MSMEs. Or perhaps until 0.0%, or perhaps until minus 0.1%. So when the MSMEs borrow 100 million rupiah, they only have to, for example, pay about 99 millions. Because the government actually cover the interest rates until minus. And then another scheme that we can use is Kartu Prakerja scheme. And this actually an idea from Pak Chatib Basri of Universitas Indonesia, and then Bu Remahana, and then Pak Benjamin Olken from Harvard University. And then they said that this Kartu Prakerja scheme could work. Yeah, of course, it's criticized by many people out there, but for example, um, we know that this pandemic, according to IMF, they said there are going to be new poor, in this country. So these new poor, they are belong to this so-called middle to lower income groups. They're not middle class, but they're not lower class either. They're not classified as poor people by Indonesian government, but they need money. So these people, middle to lower class, uh, cannot be given this cash transfer. So what should be done by the government? It's let them reveal their preferences. Kartu Prakerja ask them to train, have this kind of training, and then provide them with 600,000 incentives. And then if we think of it, middle class to middle upper class, they're not going to, they don't want to waste their time having this kind of training of 6 hours of training to get 600K. And then the ones that want the 600Ks are those who badly needs the money, you know so those people are going to reveal themselves, those new poor, and then we can identify them. We can put them into the database, so they can be given another incentives, in a different form of incentives from the cash transfer provided to the poor. So this, not only the Kartu Prakerja act as the cash transfer to the middle lower income, it also serves as the data gathering, because in the data in this country apparently is not as good as we thought, is not as rich as we thought. And then for the middle class, we can subsidize their basic needs, the electricity, water, etc., etc. Of course, the middle class, they have certain things that needs to be paid, basic income, basic needs. If the government subsidize those basic needs, they will have more money to do the consumption. So if they consume more, of course, to boost the consumption from the middle class, for example, the consumption of the middle class is already doing good. So the aggregate consumption will actually increasing as well, shifting aggregate demand to the right. So, the middle class are going to be helping the country in recovering the economy, because they have extra money, because the basic needs, again, just like what I said, is subsidized by the government. And then if we see the fiscal policy, per October, according to Statista in here, the 4.4% of the national GDP, the Indonesian GDP, is ready to be reimbursed for the fiscal stimulus. 4.4%, it actually reached about 100 trillion of rupiah, or billions of dollars. It's 100 trillion of rupiah. And then if we see it, of course, um, I took this data from DTKS and also from Bappenas, and they are compiled by Kemenkiw, or the Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. And then we see there are 10 million receiver of program Keluarga Harapan, PKH, and it has been done, I believe, by the government right now. and there's Kartu Sembako, 200K per month, and then the electricity subsidy, the subsidy listrik, and it covers people from decile income from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. In this case, only 1 until 2. In this case, 1 until 3. And then there's Bansos Tunai Jabodetabek for decile income 4 and 5, and it provides at least 600K outside the receiver of PKH and the Sembako card. And then also this Bansos Sembako Jabodetabek. This one is actually controversial because apparently the Ministry of Social Affair, I think, is corrupt. The corruption in this one, and then that's actually very, very terrible. And then so 600K again per month, but it's for decile income of 5 in here. So those who have received this and this does not is not able to receive this one. But this one, BLT Dana Desa, 11 millions receivers in this case, and then those that can receive this supposed to be the one that did not receive this one. And then also Kartu Prakerja for decile income from middle to lower income. So those who can actually receive the Kartu Prakerja scheme are the ones who does not receive this one, and this one, of course. And I think it's actually been doing right now by the government. And then how we can finance those stimulus package from SAL, we got it, SAL, and then the Dana Abadi in Indonesian, Kemenkiw has this kind of card, Dana Abadi, or in BLU, Badan Layanan Umum and stuff. And then also a borrowing bilateral or multilateral borrowing. Bilateral borrowing, which means that you borrow from another country gives you loan. Or in multilateral, just like what we did in 1997 from the IMF, due to the financial crisis, IMF, World Bank, or any multilateral organization that provide the loans. And then we in order to do that, we have to print this domestic or global bonds, government bonds, we call it. And then if we see this has actually been done by several countries and done by us as well through ORI, we call it. So in this case, the government owes you money because you loan the money to the government through the what is that, this ORI paper. And then in this case, I think ORI could be a very good way out, of course, because in Japan, this government bond are bought mostly by the Japanese citizens. In this case, I think we could do that as well. We could provide I think it's I think it's already been done by the government, and I think we could do that in terms that we can be the one buying the government bonds, helping the government to gather money. The money gathered could be could be expense. It could be what is that? Could be yeah, could be used to provide credits to MSMEs, to provide cash transfer for the poor, and then so actually we actually provide money to the government, so the government collect them, and they are going to use it for certain certain policy. And I think it's very admirable trade. Sorry, not trade, but that's a very good deed that we can do as a citizen, helping our government in time of crisis. And then or maybe global bonds, the government can actually print this kind of government bonds valuing at until maybe 1 billion rupiah, and then another country or certain organization are going to buy the global bonds and provide Indonesian government with new money. But the consequences is that we are going to have to pay for that the next through austerity, because austerity means that the government stop their spending and then cut their spending, sorry, and then they are going to increase taxes because the taxes perhaps are need to pay the global bonds that the government, Indonesian government print and sell, sorry, to the certain countries or perhaps organizations out there. And then these instruments are very very common. I think we've been doing it. We can do it again. And I think I have to say that I think we have to be flexible on our budget in order to make this thing happen. And I think Indonesian people needs to be to realize, sorry, Indonesian people needs to realize that actually borrowing money in order to pay for this kind of crisis, or perhaps to uh, government have this kind of productive spending, buying capital goods, perhaps. You know, I think we should normalize that, as long as we are not exceeding the debt to GDP ratio that we can that we are going to discuss later. And then printing money. Yeah, but yeah, it actually could be done. But well, let's not forget that COVID-19 is also a supply shock. What is a supply shock? For example, a Chinese, the China is actually the global exporter, top global exporter, you know, number one exporter in the world, and they are also the manufacturing hub of Asian countries and maybe the rest of the world. So we know that the COVID-19 push the originated from China, by the way, and has pushed the Chinese government. So the Chinese workers supplying the global demand, they are having what is that, a hard time because of the pandemic. So they are pushed and forced to stay at home by the Chinese government, which means that if we multiply the factories that does not do or perhaps produce things by at least 1,000 factories, it creates a demand, or sorry, supply shock, global supply shock, because the factory workers, they're not working, they are staying at home, and then there are maybe tens of millions or perhaps hundreds of millions workers out there in China does not actually do their job because they are forced to stay at home. So it creates a supply shock. What does it mean? What is the correlation between the printing money? If we print more money and there's no supply, then no, more money are on the circulation than goods, it's an inflation, hyperinflation. It's very, very dangerous. And I don't think the government are going to do this. This is a very, very last resort. I don't know, maybe some modern MMT out there, modern monetary theory out there, maybe, does not agree with me, but we've seen the result in, uh, for example, in Zimbabwe or perhaps in Venezuela. I don't want my country to be like those two countries. So in order to borrowing, we need to see the debt to GDP ratio, and then our country is actually very prudent. We do not spend lots of money, and then we do not borrow lots of money either. I think because I believe we are still a bit traumatized by the 1997 financial crisis that pushed us to borrow lots of money from the IMF. So if we see from 2019 and to 2020, there's only like 8.5% in an increase, and then 38% or perhaps 30 to 40%, 50%, it's still safe. And then, as long as we do not exceed, for example, 60 or 70%, I think we are safe. And then if we see in certain countries over here, Brazil are having a hard time over here, the red ones. And then because it means they are having 100% more, debt to GDP ratio is 100%, and it's dangerous. And then United States of America over here, Because United States of America can borrow as much as they want, even though that they debt to GDP ratio is actually high, because people always believe that the United States of America always pay, and Indonesia is actually deemed to be one of the very good boys because we always pay as well. But if we see Japan over here, advanced economies, Japan, having 266% debt to GDP ratio, but Japan's debt are actually productive, spent on productive things, and also land to their own loaning their own citizens, and also uh, owing money to their own citizen, also owing money to certain countries. That Japan has this kind of complex debt system, and I don't know the real inside the Minister of Finance of Japan, but I think they're doing very very okay despite having this kind of staggering 266% debt to GDP ratio. So I think that's all from me. And then if you got questions, of course, leave it in a comment and etc. etc. And then uh, I don't know though. If you got a question that I may not be able to answer, I'm going to let you, ask your question to my lecturer. So thank you. So yeah, please, because we've just seen this, you know, where is it now? We've seen this formula over here. We know that aggregate consumption is actually very very important for the revival of our economy, so we can actually avoid the recession in the next quarter four. So please consume. You don't want to put your money in a bank for too long. It creates something that is called Ricardian equivalence, and which means that the more money saved, the more the lesser the aggregate consumption, because people don't actually just consume; they just save the money, and it's bad for the GDP over here. And then, of course, yes, it's good for your financial individual financial safety. However, in the aggregate, it does not look very very beautiful, because the decrease in consumption resulting to the decrease in GDP. So I believe in the end of this presentation, I would like to say that I believe if we increase government spending, providing cash transfer, or perhaps building something just like what the Keynesian economists did in the United States in 1930, post-Great Depression, we can boost consumption. And then if both of these, of course, are increasing, the result will be an increase in GDP, and we are going to save our country from a recession, a possible recession. In fact, of course, uh, maybe we can fulfill the forecast of IMF that says we are going to have a very good economic growth post COVID-19 in 2021 or 2022. So thank you, and have a good night, have a good day.